During a relentless flood, a poor girl threw herself into the waters to save a stranger trapped in a luxury car. While everyone hesitated, she braved the current and rescued him with an act of uncommon courage. What seemed like mere heroism revealed a deep connection between the two. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The Mississippi River had never looked so angry. In the small riverside town of River Haven, Louisiana, the spring floods had arrived with unprecedented fury, turning streets into canals and homes into islands. The poorer neighborhoods along the riverbanks, where generations of families had lived despite the annual threat of rising waters, were being swallowed whole by the muddy deluge. 12-year-old Abby Coleman stood on what remained of her grandfather's porch, her bare feet caked with mud, her clothes soaked through. The old wooden house, elevated on stilts like most in the area, had mostly survived, but the water was still rising. Her grandfather, Old Jack, had gone to help the Wilsons next door, leaving Abby to watch their few remaining possessions. Rain had finally stopped, but that meant little now. The river had already broken through the levees upstream, and nothing could stop the wall of water making its way through town. From her vantage point, Abby could see the devastation. Rooftops barely visible above the water, trees uprooted, cars submerged. It was then that she spotted it, a sleek black luxury sedan trying to navigate the flooded main road. Even from a distance, Abby could tell it was expensive, the kind of car that never stopped in their neighborhood. The driver seemed determined to push through, unaware that what looked like a shallow stretch was actually a collapsed section of road. "Hey!" Abby shouted, waving her arms frantically. "Stop! You can't go that way!" But her voice was lost in the roar of the water and the distance between them. She watched in horror as the car lurched forward, then suddenly dropped as its front wheels found empty space. The current caught it immediately, spinning the vehicle around and pushing it toward the demolished remains of the old railway bridge. Without thinking, Abby jumped from the porch into the knee-deep water surrounding the house. She knew these waters, knew every bend and dip of this land. Her grandfather had taught her to swim almost before she could walk, in this very river during calmer summers. "Abby!" Old Jack's voice called from somewhere behind her, but she was already moving, wading through the current that pulled at her small frame. As she got closer to the main channel where the car was now being swept along, the water deepened. Abby dove forward, her strong arms cutting through the muddy flow. The car had become lodged against the concrete remains of the bridge, but water was rapidly filling its interior. Through the window, she could see a man in a suit slumped over the steering wheel. The current was vicious here, threatening to tear her away from the vehicle with each stroke. Several neighbors had gathered on higher ground, watching helplessly. Abby recognized the fear in their faces, not just fear of the dangerous waters, but something else. Some were whispering, pointing at the car. "That's one of them Thornton people," she heard someone say, "from that company that's been buying up all the land." Abby didn't care who he was. All she knew was that someone needed help and she could provide it. Reaching the car, she clung to the side mirror, then pulled herself toward the driver's door. The window was partially open, and she could see the man more clearly now, middle-aged, gray at the temples, a bleeding cut on his forehead. His eyes were closed. The water inside had reached his chest. With strength born of desperation, Abby managed to get her fingers through the window gap and pull at the door handle from the inside. The door gave way suddenly, nearly washing her downstream, but she held tight as water gushed out. The man was still unconscious, secured by his seatbelt. Abby reached in, fumbling with the clasp until it released. Now came the hardest part. Though she was strong for her age, the man was a full-grown adult and the current was working against her. "Please wake up," she pleaded, slapping his face lightly. "I can't do this alone." As if hearing her, the man's eyes fluttered. Confusion, then panic crossed his face as he registered the water, the wrecked car, and the small girl clinging to his door. "The car's trapped," Abby shouted over the roar of the water. "We need to swim to that tree over there. Can you swim?" The man nodded weakly, seeming to gather his wits. "Yes," he managed, his voice rough. "Follow me and hold on to my shirt if you need to," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument despite her young age. Together, they pushed away from the car, Abby leading the way with powerful strokes. Her grandfather had taught her, occasionally turning to make sure the man was still behind her. The current fought them, but Abby knew its patterns, using eddies and calmer patches to make progress toward a partially submerged oak tree 30 yards away. By the time they reached it, the man was clearly exhausted, clinging to a thick branch with the last of his strength. Abby helped him climb higher to where the tree's massive trunk provided a stable resting place above the waterline. "Thank you," he gasped, once they were secure. I would have—" "It's okay," Abby said, suddenly shy now that the immediate danger had passed. "My grandpa says the river takes enough without us letting it take people too." The man studied her face, his expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "What's your name?" "Abby. Abby Coleman." "I'm Robert Thornton," he replied, extending a trembling hand which she shook firmly. "You saved my life, Abby." She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done it. But they both knew that wasn't true. From their perch in the tree, they could see several adults who had been watching the entire scene unfold without attempting to help. There was something in their faces, a coldness, perhaps even satisfaction at seeing a rich man's car swept away. "Not anyone," Robert said quietly, following her gaze. "Not everyone has your courage." As his breathing steadied, Robert reached into his pocket, pulling out a waterlogged wallet. "I want to reward you for—" "I don't want your money," Abby interrupted, a flash of pride crossing her face. Her clothes might be second-hand, and her family might be poor, but old Jack had raised her with dignity. Robert looked startled, then nodded slowly. "Of course. I apologize." As they sat waiting for the rescue boats they could hear in the distance, Robert noticed something glinting against Abby's collarbone, a small pendant hanging from a simple cord around her neck. His breath caught. "That pendant," he began, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Where did you get it?" Abby's hand went to the small metal object reflexively. "This? I've had it forever. A boy gave it to me years ago." She looked down at it fondly. "It's special to me." Robert's face had gone pale, and not from his recent ordeal. His hand shook as he reached toward it, stopping just short of touching it. "May I see it? Please?" Confused by his intensity, Abby lifted the cord over her head and handed him the pendant. It was nothing fancy, just a small metal disc with an unusual design stamped into it, something like a compass rose with additional markings. Robert turned it over with trembling fingers. On the back were tiny, barely legible initials, MTJ Michael. "Thomas Thornton, Jr., he whispered, his voice breaking. "My son." Abby stared at him. "Your son? The boy who gave me this was your son?" Before Robert could answer, they heard old Jack's voice calling from a small fishing boat making its way toward them. "Abby, thank God you're all right." As the boat drew closer, Robert clutched the pendant tightly, his knuckles white. This pendant was custom-made. Only two existed in the world, one for my son and one for me. He pulled a chain from beneath, his sodden shirt revealing an identical pendant. "My son disappeared 7 years ago during a school trip to this area. He was 10 years old." Abby's eyes widened. "The boy who gave me this, well, it was during a school visit. He was nice to me when some other kids weren't. He said it was his lucky charm, but he wanted me to have it." "When?" Robert demanded, his voice urgent. "When exactly?" "I was 5, so 7 years ago, I guess, in the spring." The boat reached them, old Jack's weathered face a mask of relief and concern. "Abigail Marie Coleman, what were you thinking? You could have been swept away." As they climbed into the boat, Robert kept his eyes fixed on Abby, a storm of emotions crossing his face. "I need to talk to you more about this, about the boy who gave you the pendant." Old Jack eyed the well-dressed stranger suspiciously. "And who might you be?" "Grandpa, this is Mr. Thornton," Abby explained. "And I think I might know something about his missing son." The boat fell silent, save for the sound of the motor and the rushing water around them. In the distance, the submerged car finally broke free from the bridge remains and disappeared beneath the muddy current, carried away like so many other things the river had claimed over the years. But unlike those other losses, a new possibility had just surfaced, one that would change all their lives forever. Robert Thornton sat in old Jack Coleman's modest kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee, warming his hands. Outside, the floodwaters continued to rise, but here, on the highest ground in Riverhaven, they were temporarily safe. The house was simple but immaculately maintained, filled with handmade furniture and fishing memorabilia. Photos of Abby at various ages adorned the walls, but Robert noticed there were no pictures of her parents. After changing into dry clothes borrowed from a neighbor, Robert had called his assistant to let them know he was safe. He'd been on his way to inspect potential sites for the new Thornton Enterprises development project when his GPS had directed him through Riverhaven as a shortcut. Now that detour seemed like fate. Abby sat across from him at the wooden table, also in dry clothes, her wet hair pulled back in a ponytail. The pendant, his son's pendant, lay between them on the table like a bridge connecting their worlds. "Tell me everything you remember about the boy who gave you this," Robert said gently. Abby's forehead creased as she concentrated. "I was really little, but I remember because it was exciting. A bunch of fancy school kids coming to visit our town. They came on this big bus with their name on it." She closed her eyes, summoning the memory. "Westbrook Academy, I think?" Robert nodded. "That's right. Michael attended Westbrook." "They were doing some kind of nature study thing on the river," Abby continued. "Their teachers brought them down to the docks where my grandpa works. Some of the kids were making fun of how we live, saying mean things." Her face clouded. "But not him. He was nice. He asked me questions about the river and the boats." Old. Jack stood by the stove, listening silently as he prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. His weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes never left Robert. "We played for a while," Abby said. "He showed me his pendant and told me it was special because it matched his dad's. Said it had a secret compass inside that would always point home." She smiled at the memory. "I thought that was so cool. Then the next day I saw him again. He looked scared. He gave me the pendant and said maybe I needed it more than him since I lived by the river." Robert's hands tightened around his mug. "And that was the last time you saw him?" Abby nodded. "He said he'd come back someday to get it, but he never did. I saw him talking to a man in a suit later that day, near the old boathouse. Then the teachers were all running around looking for someone. There were police and search boats on the river for days after." "Do you remember anything about the man in the suit?" Robert asked, his voice strained. Abby shook her head. "Not really. I was hiding in the bushes. I just remember he looked angry, and he had a fancy watch that caught the sunlight." Old Jack finally spoke, setting plates of food in front of them. "There's something you should know, Mr. Thornton. That school visit wasn't just any field trip. Those Westbrook folks were doing environmental studies as part of the early planning for what would become your company's first development project in this region." Robert stared at him, the implications sinking in. "How do you know this?" "Folks around here have long memories," Old Jack said, taking a seat at the table. "Especially when it comes to outsiders interested in our land. The teacher in charge mentioned it, said the students were helping gather data for a special project with Thornton Enterprises. Seemed proud of it." Robert's mind raced back 7 years. It was true. Thornton Enterprises had been in early exploration phases for riverfront development in this region, though he'd delegated most of that work to his management team and his wife, Victoria. She had been particularly passionate about expanding into Louisiana, convincing him of the investment potential while he focused on their operations in Texas. "I never connected Michael's school trip to our business interests," Robert admitted. "The official report said he wandered off during free time and likely fell into the river. The current was strong that day. They searched for weeks, but—" His voice faltered. "No body was ever found," Old Jack finished quietly. Robert looked up sharply. "How would you know that?" "Like I said, folks remember. That kind of thing doesn't happen around here without everyone knowing the details. Some of us helped with the search." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the distant sound of rescue boats and the gentle drumming of rain that had started again, Mr. Thornton, Abby said suddenly. If they never found him, could he still be? You know, out there somewhere? The question hung in the air, the same question that had tormented Robert for years, that had driven him to continue private searches long after the authorities had given up. I don't know, he answered honestly. For years I've tried to accept that he's gone, but there's always been this feeling, this certainty that I would somehow know if he was truly gone. He touched his own pendant. Michael and I were connected. Sometimes I still feel that connection. Old Jack studied Robert with newfound interest. You kept looking for him all these years. As much as I could, I hired private investigators, offered rewards, followed every possible lead. Eventually, my wife convinced me that I was only prolonging my own suffering, that I needed to accept reality and move on. Your wife, Old Jack repeated thoughtfully. She wasn't the boy's mother. No. Victoria is my second wife. Michael's mother passed when he was 4. Victoria and I married a year later. Abby and... Her grandfather exchanged a glance that Robert couldn't quite interpret. What? He asked. Nothing, Old Jack said too quickly. Just wondering why a busy man like yourself was driving through our flooded town alone today. No security, no assistance? Robert sighed. I've found that when you want something done right, sometimes you have to do it yourself. Victoria and the board think I'm micromanaging the new development, but there's been too many complaints about our previous projects in these communities. I wanted to see firsthand what we're dealing with. And what did you see today, Mr. Thornton? Old Jack pressed. Robert looked out the window at the devastation. Houses underwater, lives destroyed, a community fighting for survival with minimal outside help. I saw the consequences of decisions made in boardrooms far away from the realities on the ground. My company's proposed development would require additional flood control measures that would redirect water straight into neighborhoods like this one. So you do know, Old Jack said quietly. I'm learning, Robert replied. Too late for many, but hopefully not too late to change course. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Old Jack answered it to find a local deputy standing on the porch, rain dripping from his hat. Just checking on folks, the deputy explained. Making sure everyone's accounted for. We've got a shelter set up at the high school. His eyes widened when he spotted Robert. Mr. Thornton, sir, we received a call from your office reporting you missing. Your wife is very concerned. As you can see, I'm fine, Robert replied. Thanks to Abby here. Please let my office know I'll be in touch shortly. After the deputy left, Robert turned back to Old Jack and Abby. I need to make some calls, but I'd like to stay and talk more. There are too many coincidences here to ignore. He looked directly at Abby. You might be the last person who saw my son before he disappeared, and you might be able to help me figure out what really happened. We're not going anywhere, Old Jack said, gesturing to the rising water outside. And I suspect there's more to this story than any of us know yet. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Robert nodded gratefully. Thank you. I just need to call Victoria and let her know I'm safe. He stepped onto the covered porch to make the call, dialing his wife's private number. Robert? Victoria's voice was tense. Where are you? We've been worried sick. I'm fine, he assured her. Got caught in the flooding but was rescued by a local family. I'm staying with them until it's safe to travel. That's ridiculous. I'll send the helicopter to get you immediately. Just send your location. No, Robert said firmly. I'm staying, at least for tonight. There's something I need to look into here. There was a pause on the line. What could possibly require your attention in some flooded backwater town? Robert hesitated, his hand going to his own pendant. A voice in his head urged caution. Just some local insights about the development project. These people have lived with the river for generations. Their knowledge could be valuable. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Well, do be careful, darling. Those areas can be unpredictable during flooding. I'll call you tomorrow, Robert promised, then ended the call. Something in Victoria's tone had unsettled him, or perhaps it was just the day's events making him paranoid. When he returned to the kitchen, Abby was showing her grandfather the pendant, explaining the special compass feature Robert's son had told her about. The old man was examining it with interest. "This isn't just decorative," old Jack said, looking up at Robert. "This is a real working compass, just miniaturized and stylized. And these markings around the edge, they're coordinates." Robert moved closer, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Look here," old Jack pointed. "These notches correspond to specific latitude and longitude points. I'd bet good money that they mark locations that were significant to you and your son." Robert took the pendant, studying it with new eyes. Michael was fascinated by maps and navigation. For his 10th birthday, I had these made with coordinates of places that were special to us. Our home, his favorite camping spot, his mother's hometown. His voice grew soft. "I never realized he'd figured out what they meant." "Smart kid," old Jack commented. "The smartest," Robert agreed. His throat tight. He was always observing, always learning. Abby looked between the two men. "So, if the pendant is like a real compass with special places marked on it, could it help us figure out where he might have gone? If he didn't fall, in the river, I mean." Robert and old Jack exchanged glances, a spark of possibility igniting between them. "Maybe," Robert said cautiously. "But first I need to understand why he was scared that last day, and who that man in the suit was." He looked at old Jack. "Do you have any old maps of this area, from before the newer developments?" Old Jack nodded. "Got a whole collection. Been mapping these waters my whole life." "Good," Robert said, a new determination in his voice, "because I think it's time to revisit everything about my son's disappearance, and I'm starting to believe that what happened to him was no accident." Dawn broke over Riverhaven, painting the floodwaters with hues of gold and pink. The rain had stopped during the night, and though the river remained dangerously high, the worst appeared to be over. Robert stood on old Jack's porch, watching as emergency crews navigated the watery streets in boats and high-clearance vehicles. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities. After years of believing his son had been lost to the river, a simple pendant around a brave girl's neck had resurrected hope he'd long tried to bury. Old Jack joined him, offering a mug of coffee. "Water's going down slowly, but it's going." "How long before the roads are passable?" Robert asked. 3 days, maybe 4 for the main highway," old Jack replied, "but I got my boat. We can get around just fine if you need to." Robert nodded. "Grateful. I need to see where it happened, where Michael was last seen." "Figured as much," old Jack sipped his coffee. "Abby's getting dressed. She wants to help. That all right with you?" "Of course," Robert said. "She might remember details. That could be important." The old man studied Robert carefully. "You should know something about Abby. She's special. Sees things others miss. Remembers everything, especially from that time." "What do you mean, that time?" Old Jack hesitated. "The year your boy disappeared was hard on her. Her parents left not long before, just packed up and moved to California without her. Said they'd send for her once they got settled." His weathered face hardened. "Never did. The girl was heartbroken, confused. Meeting your son, even briefly, made an impression on her. She talked about him for months after." Robert absorbed this information, feeling a new layer of connection to the young girl who'd saved his life. "She's lucky to have you." "Other way around," old Jack replied simply. Inside, Abby had spread old Jack's collection of maps across the kitchen table. Some were official navigation charts, others hand-drawn by the old man himself over decades of fishing and guiding on the river. "I've been thinking," Abby said when the men entered. "If your son was scared that last day, maybe he was hiding from someone." Robert was struck by her directness. "That's possible. If I was hiding around here, I know all the best spots," she continued, her finger tracing routes along the river. "There's the old boathouse where I last saw him, but also the abandoned ranger station, the caves up in Cypress Hills, and the old sugar mill." Old Jack nodded appreciatively. "Good thinking, Abby girl." Robert studied the maps, noting how the river's course had changed over the years. Development, some by his own company, had altered the landscape significantly. "We should start at the original campsite where the school group stayed," he suggested, "then trace possible routes from there." "That'd be River Pines Campground," old Jack confirmed, pointing to a location on the map. About 3 miles upstream from here, got wiped out in a flood 4 years back, never rebuilt. Now it's just overgrown. As they prepared to leave, Robert's phone rang. His executive assistant, Jessica. Sir, I hate to bother you, but Mrs. Thornton is quite insistent on knowing your exact whereabouts. She's talking about sending a private security team to find... Tell her that won't be necessary, Robert replied firmly. I'm continuing my site survey with some local experts. The flooding has revealed important considerations for our development plans. Sir, Jessica hesitated. She's been making some unusual calls since your disappearance yesterday. To legal, to the board members. Mr. Bennett from Westbrook Academy. Called for her twice. Robert's grip tightened on the phone. William Bennett was Westbrook's headmaster, the same man who'd been in charge during Michael's disappearance. Jessica, I need you to do something discreetly. Pull all the files related to our initial land surveys in Riverhaven from 7 years ago, and any communication between Victoria and Westbrook Academy during that period. Sir, those would be in the archived servers. I'd need special clearance. Use my personal authorization code. Tell no one, especially Victoria. Send everything to my private email. After ending the call, Robert found Abby and old Jack waiting patiently. Everything okay? The old man asked. Just business, Robert replied, not ready to share his growing suspicions. Shall we go? Old Jack's boat was a sturdy fishing vessel with a reliable outboard motor. As they navigated the flooded streets of Riverhaven, Robert was struck by the devastation. Homes partially submerged, belongings ruined, lives upended. And yet he saw neighbors helping neighbors, shared meals being distributed, community members working together to salvage what they could. Your company's development would make flooding worse for these folks, old Jack commented, reading Robert's thoughts. The environmental impact report said as much, but it got buried. Revised version claimed negligible effects on existing communities. Robert frowned. I never saw the original report. Not surprising. Big companies have ways of making inconvenient truths disappear. As they left the town behind and headed upstream, the landscape changed to cypress swamps and dense riverbank vegetation. After 20 minutes, they rounded a bend to find the remains of what had once been a pleasant campground. Wooden structures, weathered and collapsing, were barely visible among the overgrowth. This is where they stayed, Robert asked, feeling a chill despite the humid air. Yep, school groups used to come regular, old Jack confirmed, guiding the boat toward a dilapidated dock. They disembarked carefully, Abby leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd explored these areas countless times. The main lodge was still standing, though its roof had partially collapsed. They had classes in here, Abby explained, pointing to what had been a large gathering space. The kids slept in those cabins over there. Robert moved as if in a trance, trying to imagine his son in this place. Michael had been so excited about the trip, his first overnight school excursion without his father. Robert had been in the middle of a major acquisition when Michael left, too busy to drive him to the bus himself. Their housekeeper had taken him instead. It was one of many regrets that haunted Robert. He sent me a text the first night, Robert recalled. Said the river was amazing, and he'd made friends with a local girl who knew all about boats. Abby looked up, her eyes bright. That was me. He said you were the bravest person he'd ever met, Robert told her with a sad smile. And that you... I didn't care that he was a nerdy city kid. I thought his science stuff was cool, Abby replied. He showed me his journal with all these drawings of plants and animals. His nature journal, Robert murmured. The police found it in his cabin. After he disappeared, it was the last thing he'd written in. They moved through the ruined campground methodically, looking for anything that might have been overlooked in the original investigation. In what had been the camp office, old Jack found moldy registration logs in a waterproof container. Look. Here, he said, pointing to an entry. Day before your boy disappeared, there's a note about an unscheduled visitor, someone from the parent company. Robert leaned in to see the faded handwriting. Mr. Howard, Thornton Enterprises, site evaluation with Dr. Bennett. Howard, Robert frowned. Thomas Howard was Victoria's personal assistant at the time. What was he doing here with the headmaster? Maybe checking on the kids, Abby suggested. Maybe, Robert agreed, though his instincts told him otherwise. Let's check the boathouse next, where you last saw Michael. The old boathouse stood at the edge of the property, partially collapsed into the river. As they approached, Abby pointed to a small path leading away from it. "That's where I was hiding when I saw your son with the man in the suit," she explained. "I wasn't supposed to be here. Grandpa told me to stay away from the school groups. But I wanted to see the city boy again." Robert crouched beside her, looking toward the spot she indicated. "And you're sure it was here? The day he disappeared?" Abby nodded solemnly. "I remember, because it started raining right after. Big storm came through. Everyone was running around looking for shelter, and that's when they noticed he was missing." Old Jack had wandered into what remained of the boathouse, his experienced eyes scanning the weathered wood and debris. "Robert," he called suddenly, "come look at this." Inside, barely visible beneath years of mud and vegetation, was a small, carved marking in one of the support beams. Robert brushed away the grime to reveal the letters MTJ, Michael Thomas, Thornton Jr., and below it a tiny rendition of the compass design from the pendant. "He was here," Robert whispered, his fingers tracing the carving. "He left a mark." "Kids often do," Old Jack said. "Leave their initials, I mean." "No, you don't understand." Robert's voice was thick with emotion. "This was our thing. Whenever we went somewhere special, we'd leave our mark together. It was our secret code. If Michael carved this here, he expected to come back," Abby finished for him. The implication hung in the air between them. If Michael had taken the time to leave his mark, he hadn't been planning to run away, and if he hadn't run away... "We need to find out who that man in the suit was," Robert said firmly. Abby tried to remember anything else about him, anything at all. Abby closed her eyes, concentrating hard. "He had a fancy watch, like I said, and he was carrying something. A folder with papers, I think. Oh, and he had a pin on his jacket, something silver and blue." "A pin?" Robert pressed. "What kind of pin?" "Like a W with something around it. I remember thinking it looked like waves." Robert's blood ran cold. "The Westbrook Academy emblem. It's a W surrounded by waves, representing knowledge flowing like water. So he was from the school?" Old Jack asked. "Or connected to it," Robert said grimly. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old photos until he found what he was looking for, a group picture from a Westbrook fundraiser 7 years ago. He zoomed in on the staff members and showed it to Abby. "Was it any of these men?" Abby studied the photo carefully, then pointed without hesitation to a tall, distinguished man with silver hair. "Him. That's definitely him." Robert stared at the image, a chill running through him despite the humid air. William Bennett, the headmaster himself. "Why would the headmaster be meeting your son secretly?" Old Jack asked. "I don't know," Robert admitted. "But Bennett and Victoria served on several charitable boards together. They knew each other well." He looked around the ruined boathouse, a new determination hardening his features. The original investigation assumed Michael wandered off and fell into the river during the storm. But what if someone took him? What if his disappearance wasn't an accident at all? The three stood in silence, the implications of Robert's words settling over them like the heavy Louisiana air. "If someone took him," Abby said slowly, "they might have left other clues, places they went, things they touched." Old Jack nodded. "The girl's right. And if they used a boat, they would have taken one of the established channels. Even in a storm, no one risks the backwaters unless they know them like family." "Then we follow the channels," Robert decided. "Map every possible route they could have taken from here." As they prepared to leave the boathouse, Abby suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on something in the corner. She knelt down and brushed away years of silt and debris to uncover a small, corroded metal object. "What is it?" Robert asked, moving closer. Abby held it up, a tarnished button with an insignia barely visible beneath the corrosion. "It's got that same W pattern." Robert took it with trembling hands. "This is from a Westbrook blazer. The buttons are custom-made with the school emblem." He looked from the button to the carved initials, then back to Abby and Old Jack. "Michael was here with someone from Westbrook, and I'm going to find out exactly what happened that day, no matter where it leads." "Even if it leads to your wife?" Old Jack asked quietly. Robert met the old man's gaze steadily, even then. Especially then. Back at Old Jack's house, Robert sat hunched over his laptop, sifting through the files Jessica had sent. The floodwaters outside had receded enough that cellular service had been restored, though it remained spotty. Abby was napping after their expedition, exhausted by the emotional and physical toll of the past 2 days. Old Jack entered with a fresh pot of coffee. Found anything? Robert rubbed his eyes. Maybe. There's a series of emails between Victoria and Bennett from the weeks before Michael's school trip. They're carefully worded, but there are references to the situation and our mutual concern. Sounds suspicious, Old Jack commented, pouring 2 mugs. It gets worse. There's a payment from our family foundation to Westbrook just after Michael disappeared, a special endowment of $2 million that bypassed the normal board approval process. Victoria authorized it, using my digital signature. Old Jack let out a low whistle. That's a lot of money to give away without telling you. And there's this, Robert turned the screen to show a document. A preliminary application to a private facility called Greenwood Institute, dated a week before the trip. It's for Michael, citing behavioral concerns requiring specialized intervention. Was there something wrong with the boy? Old Jack asked carefully. Absolutely not, Robert said firmly. Michael was sensitive, yes, preferred books and science to sports, had some anxiety after his mother passed, but there were no behavioral issues that would warrant anything like this. He scrolled further. According to this, Victoria had been consulting with Bennett about Michael's difficulties adjusting at Westbrook, but his teachers never mentioned any problems to me. In fact, his reports were excellent. A notification chimed on Robert's laptop, an incoming email from Jessica. Sir, as requested, I've gathered the documents regarding the initial Riverhaven development. Something strange. The original environmental impact study has been removed from our servers. I had to contact Dennis Miller, the engineer who conducted it, directly. He kept a personal copy and has sent it to you with this note. I always wondered when someone would ask about this. The original findings were clear. The proposed development would significantly increase flood risk for Riverhaven. I was pressured to alter my conclusions and subsequently removed from the project. I've regretted my silence ever since. Robert opened the attached report, scanning the executive summary. It was damning. The original plans would have essentially sacrificed Riverhaven to protect the luxury development his company intended to build. Victoria led that project, Robert said quietly. She assured me all environmental concerns had been addressed. Old Jack's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a knowing look. Powerful people often hear what they want to hear. I'm beginning to understand that, Robert admitted. But what does any of this have to do with Michael's disappearance? Why would Victoria... He couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. People do terrible things for money, power, control, Old Jack said. Not saying that's what happened here, but we should follow where the evidence leads. Robert's phone rang, Victoria's ringtone. He hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. Robert, this has gone on long enough. Victoria's voice was sharp with irritation. The board meeting is tomorrow, and you need to be here. I'm sending the helicopter to Riverhaven Municipal. Airport in 2 hours. I won't be on it, Robert replied calmly. Something's come up that requires my attention here. What could possibly be more important than the future of your company? Victoria demanded. The Reynolds acquisition won't wait, and the board is already questioning your commitment after your little disappearing act. I found something that belongs to Michael, Robert said, watching Old Jack's face as he deliberately dropped this information. There was a moment of silence on the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had changed subtly. What do you mean? A pendant, his compass pendant, the match to mine. Another pause. That's impossible, Robert. Michael's things were lost with him. Not all of them, apparently. He gave this pendant to a local girl the day before he disappeared. Robert, Victoria's tone turned gentle, concerned. I know how much you've struggled with Michael's passing, but finding some trinket that resembles his pendant isn't healthy. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated by these people, whoever they are. The pendant has his initials engraved on it, Victoria. It's his. Then it was found after the accident and kept by someone who should have turned it in, she replied smoothly. Either way, it changes nothing. Michael is gone, Robert. Coming back to these places, reopening old wounds, it's not what he would want for you. Robert met old Jack's gaze across the table. Maybe. But I think I'll stay a bit longer. There are some interesting people here. Robert, listen to me carefully. Victoria's voice hardened. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever investigation you're conducting, it won't bring Michael back. It will only hurt you and potentially damage everything we've built. Come home now before this goes too far. Goodbye, Victoria. I'll call you when I have more information. Robert ended the call, his jaw tight with tension. She knows something, old Jack said quietly. Yes, Robert agreed, and she's worried. A soft sound made them both turn. Abby stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. I remembered something else, she said. About the man in the suit, Dr. Bennett. When he was talking to Michael, he mentioned a woman, said, your stepmother has made arrangements and it's for the best. Robert's face paled. You're sure that's what he said? Abby nodded. I remember, because I didn't know what a stepmother was then. I asked my grandpa later. Old Jack put a protective arm around his granddaughter's shoulders. How you've got a good memory, Abby girl. The best, she agreed without pride, simply stating a fact. I also remember he had a car waiting on the service road behind the campground, dark green like the trees. And there was someone else inside. It. Could you see who? Robert asked urgently. No, just a shape, but it looked like a woman. Robert exchanged glances with old Jack. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. I need to speak with William Bennett, Robert decided. Won't be easy, old Jack warned. Man like that will have layers of protection. I don't need easy. I just need answers. Robert turned to his laptop and began typing. Let's see what else we can find about the Greenwood Institute. After several minutes of searching, Robert sat back with a troubled expression. It's a residential facility for troubled youth in northern Louisiana. Very private, very expensive. They specialize in cases where parents want complete confidentiality. Like when rich folks want to hide away kids who cause problems. Old, Jack suggested. Exactly like that. Robert continued scrolling. They've had several investigations for controversial therapeutic techniques, but nothing ever sticks. They have powerful connections. You think they took Michael there? Abby asked, her young face serious. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Robert closed his laptop decisively. First, we need more evidence, something concrete linking Victoria, Bennett, and what happened to Michael. The school records, old Jack suggested. If Bennett was involved, there might be something in their files about that day. Those would be impossible to access, Robert began, then stopped as an idea formed. Unless... Abby, you said Bennett had papers with him when you saw him with... Michael? Yes, in a folder, blue with the school logo. If he dropped anything, it might still be there, Robert reasoned. The investigation focused on the river and the main campground areas. If Bennett took Michael somewhere private to talk... We should go back, Abby said eagerly. I can show you exactly where I saw them. Old Jack checked his watch. It's getting late. Woods aren't safe after dark, especially with the ground still soggy from the flood. Better to go at first light. Robert reluctantly agreed, though every instinct urged him to action immediately. 7 years had passed already. One more night seemed unbearable. As they prepared a simple dinner, Robert's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some things should stay buried. He showed it to old Jack, who frowned deeply. Someone knows you're asking questions. Victoria, Robert guessed. She has ways of tracking me. Then we need to be careful, old Jack said. Very careful. After dinner, as Abby washed dishes, Robert and old Jack spread the maps out again, this time marking all possible routes from the boathouse to nearby roads. If they used a vehicle, old Jack reasoned, they'd need to get Michael to it without being seen. There's the service road Abby mentioned, but also these maintenance paths. Any of them would work. And if they wanted to make it look like an accident in the river, Robert asked, the question painful even to voice. Old Jack's weathered finger traced the waterways. They'd need to leave evidence near the main channel, where a search would focus. But if someone actually knows these waters, there are a dozen places where things get trapped: eddies, root systems, old sunken boats. Places where they could plant evidence, Robert concluded grimly. Exactly. And if the sheriff at the bay? Time wasn't looking too hard. Old Jack let the implication hang. Sheriff Cooper, Robert remembered. James Cooper. He led the search personally. Cooper's not from around here, Old Jack said. Got appointed after some political shuffling. Always seemed more interested in pleasing the wealthy folks passing through than serving the community. Robert made a note of the name. Another connection to investigate. Later that night, unable to sleep, Robert sat on the porch watching. The stars emerge above the flooded landscape. The familiar weight of grief had transformed into something else, a burning determination fueled by hope and anger in equal measure. The screen door creaked as Abby joined him, wrapped in a faded quilt. Couldn't sleep? Robert asked softly. She shook her head, thinking about Michael, what it must have been like for him. Robert swallowed hard. Me too. I think he was brave, Abby said. When I saw him with that man, he looked scared but not crying or anything. He was standing up straight. The image brought a sad smile to Robert's face. That sounds like him. He was always braver than people gave him credit for. Mr. Thornton, do you think he could still be alive? The question hung in the night air, fragile as a soap bubble. Robert had asked himself the same thing countless times over the years, hope gradually giving way to resignation. I don't know, he answered honestly, but for the first time in years I believe it's possible, and that's because of you, Abby. She smiled, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. I'm just telling you what I remember. Your memories might be the key to finding the truth. Robert hesitated, then added, whatever we discover, I want you to know how grateful I am. Not just for saving me from the flood, but for keeping Michael's pendant safe all these years, for remembering him. He was nice to me when others weren't, Abby said simply. That matters. From inside, old Jack called Abby to bed. She said goodnight and slipped back inside, leaving Robert alone with his thoughts. He pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery, scrolling to the album labeled Simply Michael. Images of his son filled the screen. Michael laughing on a swing, concentrating on a science project, sleeping with a book open on his chest. The familiar ache rose in Robert's chest, but now it was accompanied by something that had been absent for years: purpose. As Robert finally headed inside to sleep, he didn't notice the dark SUV that pulled up at the far end of the street, or the man with binoculars watching old Jack's house. Inside the vehicle, the observer made a call. He's still here, with the old man and the girl. A woman's voice responded, smooth and controlled. What are they doing? Talking, looking at maps. They went upriver today to the old campground. A pause. Keep watching. Don't intervene unless necessary. I'll handle this myself. Understood, Mrs. Thornton. The call ended, and the SUV's lights remained off as it settled in for a long night of surveillance, its occupant unaware that the flood had washed away more than just homes and roads. It had unearthed secrets that had been carefully buried for 7 long years. The early morning mist clung to the water as old Jack's boat cut silently through the flooded backwaters. They had left before dawn, taking a circuitous route to avoid any potential watchers. Old Jack navigated with the confidence of a man who knew every bend and tributary by heart, occasionally glancing at Robert in the dim light. You didn't sleep much, the old man observed. No, Robert admitted. Too many thoughts. Been there, old Jack nodded. When Abby's parents left her with me, I spent months of nights just watching her sleep, wondering if I was enough for her. Robert glanced back at Abby, who was huddled in the stern, still, drowsy but determined to help. You were more than enough from what I can see, old Jack shrugged. Did my best. That's all any of us can do. He lowered his voice. Speaking of doing your best, I saw that SUV watching the house last night. Didn't mention it because I didn't want to scare Abby. I noticed it too, when I went for water around 3 a.m., Robert replied quietly. Victoria's people, I assume. Figured as much, that's why we're taking the long way around, They continued in silence until they reached a narrow channel that looked barely navigable. Old Jack skillfully guided the boat through the tight passage, cypress knees and submerged vegetation scraping against the hull. "Almost there," he murmured. "This back route will bring us up behind the boathouse, away from where anyone would expect us to approach." The boat emerged into a small, secluded cove. Old Jack cut the engine and used a pole to guide them the final distance to shore. The boathouse was barely visible through the trees, approached from the opposite side of their previous visit. "Perfect," Robert said appreciatively. "Where exactly did you see Bennett and Michael talking, Abby?" Now fully awake, Abby pointed to a narrow path leading away from the boathouse. "They walked that way, toward that clearing. I followed them, but stayed hidden in the bushes." They disembarked carefully, Old Jack securing the boat before they proceeded. The ground was still muddy from the flood, making their progress slow and deliberate. Abby led the way, occasionally stopping to get her bearings. "It was here," she finally said, stopping in a small clearing about 100 yards from the boathouse. Michael was standing there, and Dr. Bennett was right in front of him. She pointed to spots on the ground. Bennett had his folder, and he kept checking his watch. He seemed nervous. Robert surveyed the area methodically. "And you said there was a car on a service road nearby?" "Yes, through those trees," Abby pointed. "I didn't go closer because I was scared they'd see me." "Smart girl," Old Jack commented. The three of them began searching the clearing, careful, not to disturb anything more than necessary. The years and weather had erased most signs of what had happened here, but they worked systematically, examining every inch of ground. "Look for anything that doesn't belong," Robert instructed. "Anything man-made." After 20 minutes of searching, it was Abby who made the discovery. Beneath a thick layer of leaves and dirt near the base of a large oak tree, her fingers found something smooth and rectangular. "I found something," she called, carefully brushing away more debris. Robert and Old Jack hurried over as she unearthed a small electronic device, corroded but still recognizable. "It's a voice recorder," Robert said, taking it gently, "the kind used for dictation or interviews." He turned it over, wiping away mud to reveal a monogram, WB. "William Bennett," Old Jack muttered. "Can we still get anything from it?" Abby asked, peering at the device. "Maybe," Robert said. "These models have solid-state storage. If the internal components aren't too damaged." He examined it more closely. "The battery is dead, of course, but the casing seems intact." "Water? Damage is the biggest concern." "I know someone who might help," Old Jack offered. "Eddie Fontaine over in St. Clair. Used to work for the NSA, now fixes electronics. Man's a wizard with damaged devices." "How far is St. Clair?" Robert asked. "About an hour by road, but with the flooding," Old Jack considered. 2 hours by boat, maybe less if the current's with us." "Let's go," Robert decided. "This could be the evidence we need." As they made their way back to the boat, Robert suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. In the distance, the unmistakable sound of another boat engine echoed across the water. "Someone's coming," he whispered. "Old." Jack nodded grimly. "And they're not fishing, not in this part of the backwater." They quickened their pace, reaching Old Jack's boat just as the sound of the other engine grew louder. Old Jack helped Abby aboard, then pushed off from shore with practiced efficiency. "Stay low," he instructed as he started the motor. "We'll take the narrow channels. They won't be able to follow if they're not local." The boat slipped into the labyrinthine waterways, Old Jack navigating by instinct through passages that seemed impossibly tight. Behind them, the other engine revved louder, then faded as they put distance between themselves and their pursuers. "Who do you think that was?" Abby asked, her voice barely audible over their own engine. "Someone who doesn't want us finding answers," Robert replied grimly. They emerged from the backwaters into a wider channel, Old Jack pushing the boat to its maximum speed. The journey to St. Clair passed in tense silence, all three watching for signs of pursuit. Eddie Fontaine's shop was located on the edge of St. Clair, a small town that had largely escaped the worst of the flooding. The weathered sign above the door read, "Fontaine Electronics, we fix the unfixable." Inside, surrounded by circuit boards and dismantled devices, they found Eddie, a thin, wiry man with thick glasses and hands that moved with surgical precision. Old Jack made the introductions, explaining their need without divulging specific details. Eddie examined the voice recorder with professional interest. Nasty corrosion, but the core might be intact. These models have good seals. He looked up at Robert. This'll take time, maybe a day, and it ain't cheap. Money is no object, Robert assured him, and we can wait. While Eddie worked, they found a small cafe in town. Over cups of strong coffee and plates of jambalaya, Robert checked his email. Several urgent messages from his office demanded attention, but it was an email from Jessica that caught his eye. Sir, I found something concerning. After our conversation, I looked into Victoria's schedule around the time of Michael's disappearance. According to her private calendar, which she doesn't know I can access, she had 3 meetings with Dr. Bennett in the week before the school trip, none of which appear in her official schedule. Additionally, she made a visit to Greenwood Institute the day after Michael was reported missing. The entry is marked simply Special Arrangement MT. There's more. I checked the company flight logs. Our corporate jet flew to a private airstrip near Greenwood on the night Michael disappeared, an unscheduled flight authorized by Victoria. The pilot's report lists no passengers, only confidential cargo. The return flight was the following. Morning. Robert's hands trembled as he read. MT, Michael Thornton. Special arrangement. The corporate jet making a secret flight on the very night his son vanished. Robert? Old Jack's voice seemed to come from far away. You okay there? Robert looked up, his face ashen. I think Victoria took my son. I think she had him transported to Greenwood Institute the night he disappeared. He showed them the email. Old? Jack read it silently, his weathered face revealing nothing. Abby, too young to fully comprehend the implications, nonetheless understood the gravity of the moment. But why, she asked. Why would she want to take him away? Robert struggled to find an answer that made sense. Michael inherited a significant trust from his mother. As his legal guardian, I controlled it until he turned 21, but I couldn't access it for any other purpose. Victoria and I were newly married when he disappeared. Our prenuptial agreement gave her limited access to my assets. So with the boy gone, Old Jack began, with Michael declared legally gone after 7 years of searching, the trust reverted to me, Robert finished, and under Louisiana law, Victoria would have claimed to apportion as my spouse. He ran a hand through his hair. But to engineer a fake disappearance, to let me believe my son was gone all these years. That's evil, Abby said simply. Yes, Robert agreed, a cold anger settling in his chest. It is. Old Jack leaned forward. What's your plan now? We get the recorder fixed, see what's on it. Then I confront Bennett directly. He's the weak link in this chain. Victoria is too controlled, too calculating. But Bennett, he's an educator, not a criminal mastermind. If pressured, he might break. And if the recorder doesn't work, Old Jack asked pragmatically, then I go to Greenwood Institute myself. If there's any record of Michael ever being there, I'll find it. They spent the night at a small motel in St. Clair, Robert barely sleeping as his mind raced with possibilities. Was Michael still at Greenwood after all these years? Had he been moved elsewhere? What had they told him about his father? Did he believe Robert had abandoned him? The questions tormented him until dawn, when they returned to Eddie's shop. The technician was waiting for them, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd worked through the night. Got good news and bad news, Eddie announced. Good news is I salvaged the data. Bad news is it's encrypted. Encrypted, Robert frowned. It's just a voice recorder. High-end model with security features, Eddie explained. Military-grade encryption, the kind government officials use for sensitive information. He handed Robert a small USB drive. All the data's on here, but you'll need the password to access it. Robert took the drive, turning it over in his hand. Any idea what the password might be? Eddie shook his head. Could be anything. But whatever's on there, someone went to a lot of trouble to keep it secret. After thanking Eddie and paying him generously, they returned to Old Jack's boat. As they prepared to depart, Robert's phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Thornton, a male voice said when he answered. This is Dr. William Bennett. I understand you've been asking questions about me. Robert's grip tightened on the phone. Dr. Bennett. Yes, I have some questions about my son. I thought you might. I've been expecting your call for years, to be honest. Bennett's voice was carefully controlled. I'm in Baton Rouge today. Perhaps we could meet. Why should I trust you? Robert demanded. A pause. Because I've been carrying this burden for 7 years, Mr. Thornton, and because I have information about Michael that you need to hear. Where and when? The Riverside Hotel, Suite 712. Come alone, please, 3 o'clock. The call ended. Robert looked at old Jack and Abby, who had been watching intently. Bennett wants to meet, he explained. In Baton Rouge this afternoon. Smells like a trap, old Jack warned. Possibly, Robert agreed, but it's also the first direct link to Michael I've had in 7 years. I have to go. We're coming with you, Abby declared firmly. Old Jack nodded. The girl's right, you shouldn't face this alone. Robert considered protesting, then realized these two people, virtual strangers just days ago, had become his strongest allies. Thank you, he said simply. They navigated back toward Riverhaven, old Jack taking a different route to avoid potential surveillance. As they rounded a bend in the river, Abby suddenly pointed to the shoreline. Look, that's the old sugar mill I told you about. Kids say it's haunted, but Grandpa says that's just stories to keep us from playing in a dangerous place. Robert glanced at the crumbling brick structure, half hidden by vegetation. Something about it tugged at his memory. Wait, he said suddenly. Stop the boat. Old Jack cut the engine, looking at Robert questioningly. The pendant, Robert explained, pulling out his own from beneath his shirt. The coordinates around the edge, one of them might match this location. He studied the tiny markings carefully, then looked up at the dilapidated sugar mill. This is it. This is one of the locations marked on our pendants. Why would your special places include an abandoned sugar mill in Riverhaven? Old Jack asked skeptically. They wouldn't, Robert said, his mind racing. Unless Michael added it after he came here, Abby finished, her eyes wide with understanding. Robert nodded. These pendants were custom-made when Michael was 9, with coordinates that were significant to us then. If he added this location later, then he was here long enough to know the area, old Jack concluded. Long enough to make this place important to him. They guided the boat to shore, approaching the old mill cautiously. The structure was partially collapsed, with nature reclaiming much of it. Vines crawled up the brick walls, and trees grew through what had once been the floor. Be careful, old Jack warned. These old places can be treacherous. They moved slowly through the ruins, looking for any sign that Michael might have been there. In what had once been the main processing room, Robert noticed something carved into one of the support beams, the now familiar MTJ initials with the compass symbol beneath. He was here, Robert whispered, his fingers tracing the carving, just like at the boathouse. Look at this, Abby called from nearby. She was pointing to a series of marks on another beam, tally marks grouped in sets of 5, with the last set incomplete, 37 marks in total. Counting days? Old Jack suggested. Or weeks, Robert said. 37 weeks would be about 8.5 months. They continued exploring, finding more evidence of a prolonged presence. A sheltered corner with the remains of what might have been a makeshift bed, a collection of river stones arranged in a pattern, a rusted tin that had once held food. Someone lived here, old Jack said quietly, at least for a while. Michael, Robert breathed, hope and anguish warring in his chest. Maybe, old Jack replied, but this was years ago. Abby had wandered to what had once been an office. Mr. Thornton, she called suddenly, I found something. Robert and old Jack hurried to join her. In a metal filing cabinet, partially protected from the elements, Abby had discovered a water-damaged notebook. The cover was faded but still legible. Property of Michael T. Thornton, Jr. With trembling hands, Robert opened it. Many pages were ruined, the ink washed away by water and time, but some entries remained readable. A journal written in his son's familiar handwriting. April 15th, Robert read aloud. Still at the mill. Don't know how long it's been. They said Dad doesn't want me anymore, that he sent me away because I'm too much trouble. I don't believe them. Dad wouldn't do that. We have our code, our secret places. He'll find me. Robert's voice broke. He had to stop, overwhelmed by emotion. Old Jack gently took the journal and continued reading where Robert had left off. May 2nd. They check on me every few days. Food, water, medicine. Say I can go to a better place if I cooperate, won't sign their papers. Won't say Dad abandoned me, they get angry. The woman is scariest, cold eyes. Victoria, Robert whispered. Old Jack turned a page, most of which was illegible. Near the bottom, a partial entry could be made out. Escaped during the storm, river is flooding, heading for our special place. If Dad gets my message. The rest was lost to water damage. The final legible entry was dated simply June. Been with the river people. They're kind. Don't ask questions. The old woman treats my fever. Can't remember some things. Hit my head. When the boat capsized. Remember, Dad, our pendants. Must find him. Someone comes looking. Have to keep moving. Robert took the journal back, cradling it like the precious artifact it was. He escaped, he said, his voice a mixture of pride and pain. He got away from them and survived, at least for a while, Old Jack added. We need to find these river people, he mentioned, Robert said urgently. Someone must remember a boy matching Michael's description. River folk keep to themselves, Old Jack cautioned. Especially with outsiders, but I know some of the old families. We can ask. As they carefully secured the journal and prepared to leave, Robert's phone chimed with a text message. It was from Dr. Bennett. Time is running out. Victoria knows. You've found the mill. If you want the truth about Michael, come now, alone. The Riverside Hotel in Baton Rouge rose like a glass monolith above the Mississippi, its reflective windows catching the afternoon sun. Robert stood in the lobby, his heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. Despite Old Jack's protests, he had insisted on meeting Bennett alone, though they had compromised with Old Jack and Abby waiting in a cafe across the street, ready to call authorities if Robert didn't check in every 30 minutes. The elevator ride to the 7th floor seemed interminable. Robert clutched Michael's journal in an inside pocket of his jacket, the USB drive with Bennett's encrypted recordings secure in another. After days of searching, he was finally face to face with someone who knew what had happened to his son. Suite 712 was at the end of a plush corridor. Robert knocked firmly, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. William Bennett opened the door himself. He had aged considerably since the school photograph, his once silver hair now white and thinning, his tall frame slightly stooped. The confident headmaster had been replaced by a man who looked haunted, with dark circles under wary eyes. Mr. Thornton, Bennett said quietly, please come in. The suite was elegant but impersonal, clearly a temporary space rather than Bennett's home. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the river below, flowing endlessly toward the Gulf. I won't waste time with pleasantries, Robert said as the door closed behind him. Where is my son? Bennett gestured to a chair. Please, sit. This is a complicated story. I'll stand, Robert replied coldly. Bennett sighed, moving to pour himself a drink from the minibar with slightly trembling hands. I deserve your anger, more than you know. He took a long swallow of amber liquid. I've been carrying this burden for 7 years, telling myself I did what I had to do, that I had no choice. There's always a choice, Robert said. You chose to help take my son away from me. Bennett didn't deny it. Victoria approached me. About 6 months before the incident. She expressed concerns about Michael's emotional stability, his attachment to you, his reluctance to accept her as his new mother. She suggested that Michael might benefit from specialized care. There was nothing wrong with my son, Robert said through clenched teeth. No, there wasn't, Bennett agreed, surprising Robert. He was a bright, sensitive boy adjusting to loss and change, but Victoria was persuasive. She made substantial donations to Westbrook's endowment fund. She arranged for my daughter's medical school tuition to be covered by an anonymous scholarship, and she made it clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. "So you sold my son for money," Robert said, disgust evident in his voice. Bennett flinched. It wasn't that simple. Victoria had evidence, fabricated I now believe, suggesting I had misappropriated school funds years earlier. My career, my reputation, everything I'd built would be destroyed. I told myself Michael would receive good care, that the separation would be temporary. "What happened on that field trip?" Robert demanded. Bennett moved to the window, staring out at the river as if the answers lay in its murky depths. The plan was to separate Michael from the group, make it appear he had wandered off and fallen into the river. Victoria had arranged for him to be transported to Greenwood Institute that night. I was supposed to inform him that you had decided this was best for everyone, that you would visit when you could. But Michael didn't believe you, Robert guessed, remembering the journal entries. "No," Bennett admitted. "He was adamant that you would never send him away without telling him. Yourself. He became difficult. They had to sedate him for transport." Robert's fists clenched so tightly his nails bit into his palms. "Who is they?" "Victoria's private security. Thomas Howard oversaw the operation. They planted evidence along the riverbank, Michael's jacket, a shoe. Enough to suggest a tragic accident." Bennett turned back to face Robert. "But something went wrong. The facility reported that Michael was uncooperative, refusing to accept the story we'd fabricated about you not wanting him anymore. He kept insisting you would find him." "He was right," Robert said, his voice breaking slightly. Bennett nodded. "After several months, Victoria decided to move him to a more restrictive environment, a place called Rose Hill Manor in northern Louisiana. Very isolated, very private. They specialize in cases requiring complete discretion." "You mean they imprison children for money?" Robert translated harshly. "Essentially, yes." Bennett looked down, shame evident in his posture. "But Michael never arrived at Rose Hill. During transport there was a severe storm. The vehicle was caught in flash flooding near River Haven. In the confusion, Michael escaped." Robert's heart leaped. "When was this?" "June, 7 years ago, about 3 months after his initial disappearance. The timeline matched the journal entries they'd found at the sugar mill." "And then what happened?" Bennett spread his hands, helplessly. "Chaos. Victoria was furious. She had Howard's team searching everywhere, but they couldn't find him. The official story remained that Michael had drowned during the school trip. Victoria couldn't report him missing again without revealing the truth. So my son was just out there, alone, while I was led to believe he was gone." Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "There were rumors," Bennett continued. "Sightings of a boy matching Michael's description among the river communities. Howard's men followed every lead, but the people there protect their own. Close-knit, suspicious of outsiders. If they were sheltering Michael, they weren't talking." Robert pulled out the journal, holding it up for Bennett to see. "We found this at the abandoned sugar mill. It's Michael's." Bennett's eyes widened. "May I?" Robert hesitated, then handed it over. Bennett flipped through the water-damaged pages carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "This confirms what I suspected," he said finally. "Michael was hiding at the mill for some time after his escape. Then he found refuge with the river folk." He handed the journal back to Robert. "There's something else you should know. About a year after Michael's escape, Victoria told me they had found him." "What?" Robert's head snapped up. "Where?" She wouldn't say exactly, only that he was secure and being properly managed. She seemed satisfied. "I assumed they had recaptured him and placed him in another facility." "Did you ever see him again?" Robert demanded. Bennett shook his head. "No," Victoria assured me the situation was under control, and that my involvement was no longer required. My family had received all the promised benefits, and I was instructed never to speak of it again. "Yet here you are," Robert observed. "Why now? Why contact me after all these years?" Bennett moved to a briefcase on the desk, removing a folder. "Because of this. It arrived at my home yesterday. Documents proving that someone accessed the sealed records of Michael's case at Westbrook. Your assistant, I believe." He looked up at Robert. Victoria called me immediately, demanding to know if I had spoken with you. When I said no, she told me to handle it if you approached me. She seemed desperate. She should be, Robert said grimly. I'm going to find my son, and when I do, she'll face justice for what she's done. You don't understand, Bennett said urgently. Victoria isn't just desperate, she's dangerous. When Michael disappeared from that transport vehicle, the 2 guards with him were never seen again. Howard implied they had been dealt with for their incompetence. A chill ran down Robert's spine. Are you saying Victoria had them? I'm saying that Victoria Thornton will do whatever it takes to protect herself. And right now, you're the greatest threat to everything she's built. Robert processed this information, his mind racing. The encrypted recordings on your voice recorder. What's on them? Bennett looked startled. You found my recorder? Where? In the clearing near the boathouse, where you met with Michael, before he disappeared. Bennett closed his eyes briefly. I recorded our conversation and my subsequent discussion with Victoria when things started going wrong. It was my insurance policy. What's the password to decrypt it? Westbrook 1842. The year the Academy was founded. Bennett moved closer, his voice dropping. Those recordings prove everything I've told you and more. Victoria explicitly discussed having Michael declared legally gone after 7 years so she could access his trust. Which is exactly what happened, Robert said bitterly. Yes. The proceedings were finalized just 3 months ago. With Michael legally gone, his mother's trust reverted to you, and by extension, Victoria gained access to those funds as your wife. Robert's phone buzzed. A text from old Jack checking that he was okay. He sent a quick reply, then refocused on Bennett. You mentioned river communities sheltering Michael. Who specifically? Where? Bennett shook his head. I don't know. Details. Howard's men focused their search on a settlement near the old Cypress Creek area, a reclusive group led by a woman they call Mama Josie. Robert made a mental note of the name. I need you to tell me everything you remember about Michael's escape. Every detail, no matter how small. For the next hour, Bennett recounted everything. He knew dates, locations, names of those involved. Robert recorded it all, pressing for clarification when needed. The picture that emerged was disturbing, a calculated plan to remove Michael from his life, orchestrated by the woman he had trusted most. There's one more thing, Bennett said, as their conversation wound down. Victoria keeps a private safe in your home office, behind the Degas painting. The combination is your wedding anniversary. Inside is a file labeled MT Contingency. I've never seen its contents, but Howard referred to it once as their insurance policy. How do you know about this safe? Victoria showed it to me once, to impress upon me how thorough her precautions were. A warning, I think, that she had contingencies for every scenario, including my potential betrayal. Robert's phone buzzed again, this time a call from old Jack. Robert, the old man's voice was urgent. We've got company. Black SUV just pulled up. 2 men in suits asking the staff if anyone's seen you. Victoria's people, Robert guessed. I'm on my way down. Meet me at the side entrance. He ended the call and turned to Bennett. They're here. Bennett paled. You need to go. Now. What about you? I'll be fine. I'll tell them we never connected. That you didn't show up. Bennett handed Robert a business card with a number scrawled on the back. This is my personal cell. If you find Michael, I'd like to apologize to him in person someday. Robert pocketed the card without comment and moved to the door, checking the hallway before stepping out. He took the service stairs down to avoid the main lobby, emerging near the kitchen loading dock, where old Jack and Abby were already waiting in a taxi. Did you get what you needed? Old Jack asked as they pulled away from the hotel. Some of it, Robert replied, watching the hotel recede in the rear window. Bennett confirmed Victoria was behind everything. Michael escaped during transport to another facility during a storm, about 3 months after his initial disappearance, just like his journal said, Abby noted. Exactly. Bennett also mentioned a settlement near Cypress Creek where Michael might have found shelter, someone called Mama Josie. Old Jack's eyes widened slightly. Mama Josie Landry, matriarch of the oldest family on that stretch of river, known for taking in strays, human or animal, and for keeping outsiders at arm's length. You know her? Robert asked, hope rising. Know of her. Met her a few times at the fishing co-op meetings years back. Formidable woman. If anyone would shelter a boy running from trouble, it'd be her. Can you get us to her? Old Jack nodded slowly. Won't be easy. Her people don't welcome strangers, but I might be able to arrange something. As they drove back toward Riverhaven, Robert updated them on everything Bennett had revealed. Old Jack listened silently, his weathered face grim. Abby, in the back seat beside Robert, reached out to squeeze his hand when he described how Michael had refused to believe his father, had abandoned him. He never gave up on you, she said softly. And I never gave up on him, Robert replied. Not really. Even when I thought he was gone, I kept searching. Some part of me always knew. Back in Riverhaven, the floodwaters had receded enough that some roads were now passable. They returned to Old Jack's house to find it untouched, but clearly searched. Drawers slightly ajar, papers rearranged, a window in the back left unlocked. Victoria's people, Robert said grimly. Looking for evidence. Good thing we took everything important with us, Old Jack remarked, checking that his hidden shotgun was still secure beneath the floorboards. While Old Jack made calls trying to arrange a meeting with Mama Josie, Robert connected the USB drive to his laptop and entered the password Bennett had provided. The encryption unlocked, revealing several audio files dated 7 years earlier. The first recording captured Bennett's conversation with Michael, the headmaster's stilted explanation that Robert had arranged for Michael to receive special care at a private facility, and Michael's immediate vehement rejection of the story. My dad wouldn't do that, Michael's young voice insisted. He promised we'd always talk about important things together. It's our rule. The sound of his son's voice after so many years brought tears to Robert's eyes. Abby, sitting beside him, squeezed his arm in silent support. The second recording was more damning, a heated discussion between Bennett and Victoria 3 days after Michael's initial disappearance. The boy is being difficult, Victoria's cold voice stated. He refuses to accept the situation, keeps insisting Robert would never send him away without speaking to him directly. Perhaps he should speak with his father, Bennett suggested. A phone call? Absolutely not, Victoria cut him off. Robert believes his son had a tragic accident. He's devastated, but accepting it. Introducing doubt now would be cruel. This wasn't what I agreed to, Bennett protested. You said Michael would receive proper care, that this was for his well-being. And he will once he accepts his new reality. Children are adaptable, William. He'll adjust. The final recording was from months later, after Michael's escape. This is your fault, Victoria hissed. If you had handled him properly from the beginning. My fault? Bennett sounded incredulous. You're the one who orchestrated this entire charade. For what? His trust? Fund? Don't be naive. This was never just about money. Michael was a constant reminder of Robert's first wife, a connection to a past he needed to sever completely. With Michael gone, Robert is finally fully committed to our life together. And if the boy is found, if he tells his story? That won't happen, Victoria replied with chilling confidence. Thomas is handling it. The boy is just one child. Children disappear all the time, especially in areas ravaged by natural disasters. The recording ended there. Robert sat motionless, the full horror of Victoria's betrayal washing over him. She hadn't just wanted Michael's inheritance, she had wanted to erase his very existence from Robert's life. That woman, Old Jack said from the doorway, having entered silently during the playback, has much to answer for. Robert nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally he asked, Any luck with Mama Josie? Some, Old Jack replied. Got word to her through my cousin who trades with her people. She's willing to meet, but only with me and Abby. Says she doesn't trust men in expensive shoes. I need to be there, Robert insisted. Figured you'd say that. That's why I told her you saved Abby during the flood and that you're looking for your lost son. She agreed to meet all 3 of us, but only at her choosing. We'll get word of when and where tomorrow. Robert spent a restless night, listening to the recordings again, making notes, planning his next steps. By dawn, he had made a decision. He placed a call to his most trusted attorney in New Orleans. "Martin, I need you to prepare several documents urgently. First, a revised will removing Victoria as beneficiary. Second, transfer papers removing her from all company positions. Third, divorce papers citing fraud and criminal conspiracy. And finally, I need you to quietly engage a specialized team to access a safe in my home office and retrieve specific documents." After giving Martin the details of the safe's location and combination, Robert ended the call. His next call was to Jessica. "I need you to do something discreetly," he instructed. "Contact our security team and have them secure all company servers and sensitive documents. Change access codes to all systems. Do it under the guise of a routine security upgrade." "Sir," Jessica sounded concerned, "Mrs. Thornton will notice." "I'm counting on it," Robert replied. "Let me know the moment she reacts." By mid-morning, old Jack received the message they'd been waiting for. "Mama Josie will see us at noon. Her people will meet us at Cypress Creek Landing." They took old Jack's truck, now that some roads were passable, driving deep into the bayou country. Cypress Creek Landing turned out to be little more than a weathered dock extending into a narrow waterway. Two men in a flat-bottomed boat were waiting, their expressions guarded. "Jack Coleman," one called as they approached. "That's me," old Jack confirmed. "This is Abby, my granddaughter, and Robert Thornton." The men exchanged glances at Robert's name. "Follow us," the older one said simply. "No phones, no recording devices." They surrendered their phones as requested and boarded the men's boat. The journey took them through increasingly remote waterways, the cypress trees growing thicker, their massive roots creating a labyrinthine passage that would be impossible to navigate without intimate knowledge of the area. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a settlement unlike anything Robert had imagined. A collection of homes built on stilts, connected by wooden walkways, formed a small village that seemed to float among the trees. Solar panels glinted on some roofs, and gardens grew on floating platforms tethered to the structures. A gathering of people waited at the main dock, led by an elderly black woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her posture was straight, her eyes sharp and evaluating as they approached. "Mama Josie," old Jack said respectfully as they disembarked. "Thank you for seeing us." She nodded in acknowledgement, her gaze fixed on Robert. "So you're the father," she said, her voice carrying the rich cadence of Louisiana Creole. "Come to find your boy after all these years." "Yes, ma'am," Robert replied. "I've recently learned he didn't drown as I was led to believe, that he might have found shelter with your people for a time." Mama Josie studied him carefully. "Why should I trust you? How do I know you're not with those men in black cars who came looking years ago?" "Because I've spent 7 years searching for my son," Robert said, his voice breaking slightly. "Because everything I believed was a lie told by those same men in black cars. Because Michael is all I have left of the family we once were." Abby stepped forward. "He's telling the truth, Mom. I found Michael's pendant, the one that matches Mr. Thornton's." She pointed to the chain around Robert's neck. "And we found Michael's journal at the old sugar mill." Mama Josie's expression softened slightly at the sight of Abby. "The river child speaks for you. That counts for something." She turned and gestured for them to follow. "Come. We have much to discuss." She led them to the largest of the structures, a spacious home with a wide porch overlooking the water. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, generations of the Landry family and others who had lived in this hidden community. "Sit," she instructed, indicating handmade cypress. Chairs around a table, a younger woman brought tea in mismatched cups before retreating silently. "A boy came to us," Mama Josie began without preamble. 7 years ago, during the big storm, found him half drowned, clinging to debris in the creek. Brought him here, nursed him back to health. He had a head injury, couldn't remember everything, but he remembered his name was Michael and that his father would be looking for him." Robert leaned forward, heart racing. "How long was he here?" "Almost a year," she replied, "and smart boy, learned quick, helped with the boats, the gardens, started remembering more as time passed." She sipped her tea. "Then the men came looking. Black SUVs at the public landings. asking questions, offering rewards. "Victoria's people," Robert murmured. Mama Josie nodded. The boy recognized a description of one of them. Thomas, he called him. Got real scared. Said this man worked for his stepmother, that they'd told him his father had sent him away. "I would never," Robert said fiercely. "The boy knew that," Mama Josie assured him. "Said you had a special code, special places only you two knew about. Said his pendant was like a map leading home. The coordinates," Robert confirmed, "places that were special to us." Mama Josie studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. Rising from her chair, she went to a cabinet and removed a small wooden box, intricately carved with river scenes. She placed it on the table before Robert. "He left this with me. Said if his father ever came looking, I should give it to him and no one else." With trembling hands, Robert opened the box. Inside lay the second pendant, the match to his own and the one Abby had found. But this one had been modified. Additional. Tiny markings added to the circumference alongside the original coordinates. He added new locations, Robert realized. Places that became important to him here. Including this village, Mama Josie confirmed, and one other place, the place he was headed when he left us. Robert looked up sharply. "He left? When? Where did he go?" "About 6 years ago now. He said he remembered something important, something about his mother's family in North Carolina. Said there was a cabin in the mountains where he'd be safe until he could find you." "The summer cabin," Robert breathed. "Catherine's family property." "In the Blue Ridge Mountains. We spent summers there when Michael was small." He clutched the pendant tightly. "Is that where he went? To North Carolina?" Mama Josie nodded. "We helped him get there. One of my grandsons drove him part way. Last we heard, he'd made it to the mountains safely." "Was he okay?" Robert asked, barely able to form the question. "He had nightmares, trouble trusting people. But he was strong, determined. Said he had to stay hidden until he was old enough that no one could force him to go back." Her eyes held Robert steadily. "He never stopped believing you would find him someday." "Thank you," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, "for sheltering him, for helping him, for keeping his secret all these years. Children deserve protection," Mama Josie said simply, "especially from those who should love them but don't." As they prepared to leave, Mama Josie took Robert aside. "There's something else you should know. About a year after Michael left, a woman came looking for him, not with the men in black cars, alone. She had his picture." "What did she look like?" Robert asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Elegant. Expensive clothes, cold eyes, said she was his stepmother." "Victoria," Robert confirmed grimly. "She offered money for information. When we said we knew nothing, she made threats. Said she had powerful friends, that she would have our homes condemned, our land seized for development." Mama Josie's eyes hardened at the memory. "We've protected this place for 7 generations, Mr. Thornton. Against floods, against developers, against those who would take what isn't theirs. We'll keep protecting it." "And I'll help you," Robert promised. "My company will never threaten. You're home again." As they boarded the boat for the return journey, Robert felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. His son was alive. He had survived, escaped, found his way to safety through his own courage and determination. And now Robert had a destination, the mountain cabin in North Carolina. "What will you do about Victoria?" Old Jack asked as they navigated back towards Cypress Creek Landing. "Justice needs evidence," Robert replied. "With Bennett's testimony, the recordings, Michael's journal, and whatever is in that safe at the house, we'll have enough to ensure she never hurts another child again." As the boat rounded a bend in the creek, the cypress trees parting to reveal the open sky, Robert held the 3 pendants in his palm, his own, the one Abby had kept safe for 7 years, and the one Michael had left with Mama Josie as a message to his father. Together they formed a constellation of coordinates, a map leading to the person he had never stopped searching for. "Hold on, Michael," he whispered. "I'm coming to find you." The Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina rose like ancient guardians against the October sky, their slopes ablaze with autumn colors. Robert navigated the winding road with Abby beside him, Old Jack in the back seat. The rental car struggled on the steeper inclines, but Robert barely noticed. his attention fixed on the coordinates displayed on his GPS. 3 days had passed since their meeting with Mama Josie. 3 days of frantic preparation, legal maneuvering, and careful planning. Martin, Robert's attorney, had executed all requested documents with remarkable efficiency. The contents of Victoria's secret safe, including detailed records of the conspiracy to remove Michael from Robert's life, were now secured in Martin's office. Victoria herself was under investigation, her access to company resources suspended pending a board review that Robert had personally called. But all of that seemed distant now as they approached the final coordinates on Michael's pendant, the summer cabin that had once belonged to Catherine's parents. "Should be just around this bend," Robert said, his voice tight with anticipation. The road curved sharply, revealing a narrow driveway nearly hidden by overgrown rhododendrons. A weathered wooden sign, barely legible, read Lakewood. "This is it," Robert whispered. The driveway wound through dense forest for nearly half a mile before opening onto a clearing. There stood the cabin, looking much as Robert remembered it, a sturdy 2-story structure of logs and stone with a wide porch overlooking a small lake. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating someone was home. Robert parked and sat motionless, overwhelmed by memories and possibilities. What if Michael wasn't here? What if he was, but wanted nothing to do with the father who had failed to find him for 7 years? "You okay?" Abby asked softly. Robert nodded, unable to speak. "Whatever happens," old Jack said from the back seat, "you're not alone." Drawing a deep breath, Robert opened his door and stepped out. The mountain air was crisp, scented with pine and wood smoke. He approached the cabin slowly, Abby and old Jack hanging back to give him space. Before he could reach the steps, the front door opened. A young man stood in the doorway, tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, a book clutched in one hand. For a moment, he simply stared at Robert, his expression a mixture of disbelief and caution. "Michael?" Robert's voice broke on the name. The book slipped from the young man's fingers. "Dad," he whispered. There was a heartbeat of stillness, and then they were moving toward each other. Michael bounded down the steps as Robert rushed forward, meeting in an embrace so fierce it nearly knocked them both off balance. Robert held his son tightly, feeling the solid reality of him after years of emptiness. "I knew you'd find me," Michael said, his voice muffled against Robert's shoulder. "I always knew." "I'm so sorry it took so long," Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know. They told me you were gone, that you'd fallen into the river." Michael pulled back slightly, studying his father's face. He was 17, now no longer the 10-year-old boy who had disappeared, but his eyes were the same, thoughtful, intelligent kind. "I tried to get word to you," Michael said, "but they were always watching, Victoria's people. I couldn't risk it until I was sure they'd stopped looking." "I understand," Robert assured him. "You did everything right. You survived. You kept going. I'm so proud of you." Michael's eyes moved past Robert to where Abby and old Jack stood watching. "Who are they?" Robert turned, gesturing for them to approach. "This is Abby Coleman and her grandfather, Jack. Abby saved my life during a flood in Riverhaven, and she had something very special, your pendant, the one you gave her 7 years ago." Michael's eyes widened in recognition. "The river girl with the fishing boat?" Abby smiled shyly. "You remember me?" "Of course," Michael said warmly. "You showed me how to bait a hook properly, said I was doing it all wrong." "You were," Abby confirmed with a grin. Michael laughed, a sound that filled Robert's heart with joy. "You're right. I was hopeless." He extended his hand to old Jack. "Thank you for helping my dad find me, sir." "Wasn't much help needed once we had the right clues," old Jack replied, shaking Michael's hand firmly. "Your breadcrumbs led us right. To you." Michael gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside, it's getting cold out here." The interior of the cabin was just as Robert remembered, though clearly lived in now. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on science, history, and literature. A laptop sat on a desk near the window, surrounded by notebooks filled with neat handwriting. "How long have you been here?" Robert asked, taking in the evidence of his son's life. "Almost 6 years," Michael replied. "After I left Mama Josie's." Community, I remembered this place. Knew it would be safe since it was in Mom's family name, not yours. The trust from Mom's parents paid the property taxes automatically, so no one questioned me being here. How did you manage? You were just 11. Michael's expression grew more serious. It wasn't easy at first, but the caretaker couple, who look after the properties around the lake, the Hendersons, they helped me. Told everyone I was their nephew staying with them for school. They bring supplies, check on me. Mrs. Henderson was Mom's childhood friend. She recognized me right away. I should have thought to check here, Robert said, regret evident in his voice. But after the investigation focused on the river, Victoria was thorough, Michael said, a hardness entering his voice that seemed out of place in someone so young. She made sure everyone believed I was gone. Even had a memorial service according to the newspapers I found online. Robert nodded grimly. She orchestrated everything. Your disappearance, the evidence planted by the river, the failed search, all so she could eventually gain control of your trust fund once you were declared legally gone. And to have you all to herself, Michael added quietly. She never wanted me around, said I was too much like Mom, that I reminded you too much of your past life. They settled in the living room, where Michael built up the fire while Robert recounted everything they had discovered, the conspiracy between Victoria and Bennett, the planned transfer to Greenwood Institute, the recordings and documents now serving as evidence against everyone involved. So she's being investigated? Michael asked, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. Yes, the board has suspended her pending a full review, and once the authorities see the evidence, she'll face criminal charges, kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, possibly worse. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing everything. What happens now, he finally asked. With us? That's entirely up to you, Robert said gently. You've been living independently for years. You're almost an adult. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to. But you want me to come home, Michael guessed. More than anything, Robert admitted. But home doesn't have to mean the house in Houston. It could be anywhere as long as we're together. While they talked, Abby had wandered to the bookshelves, examining Michael's collection. Old Jack had stepped outside to give father and son privacy, content to enjoy the mountain vista from the porch. I've missed so much of your life, Robert continued. 7 years that we can never get back. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to be your father again. Michael's eyes glistened, with unshed tears. I'd like that too. But I'm not the same kid you remember, Dad. What happened, it changed me. It changed me too, Robert said. Made me realize what really matters. Not the company, not the wealth, not the status. Just this, family, connection, love. Michael smiled, a tentative expression that reminded Robert so much of Catherine, it made his heart ache. Then I think we'll be okay. That evening, the four of them shared a meal together, a simple affair of pasta and salad prepared by Michael, who had apparently become quite self-sufficient over the years. As they ate, Michael shared stories of his time with Mama Josie's community, of learning to navigate the waterways, of the skills that had helped him survive. They treated me like family, he explained. Taught me to fish, to garden, to read the weather. Mama Josie said I had river in my blood despite being a city kid. She spoke very highly of you, Robert told him. Said you were brave and determined. I was scared most of the time, Michael admitted, especially at first. But I kept thinking about what you always told me, that Thornton men face their fears head on. Robert reached across the table to squeeze his son's hand. You exemplified that better than I ever could. After dinner, while Abby helped Michael with the dishes, Robert stepped onto the porch where old Jack was enjoying a pipe in the cool evening air. Thank you, Robert said simply, for everything. I wouldn't have found him without you and Abby. Old Jack puffed contemplatively. Some things are just meant to be. That flood bringing you to our doorstep wasn't chance. No, Robert agreed. It wasn't. He looked out at the darkening mountains. I want to do something for your community. Not charity, real, sustainable help. The kind that empowers rather than creates dependency. Folks in Riverhaven don't need handouts, old Jack replied. They need fair treatment, Infrastructure that protects everyone, not just the wealthy. Jobs that pay living wages. Then that's what we'll do, Robert decided, starting with revising the development plans for the riverfront. No more projects that increase flood risk for vulnerable communities. Old Jack nodded approvingly. You're a different man than you were a week ago, Robert Thornton. Yes, Robert agreed. I am. The screen door opened as Abby and Michael joined them on the porch. They stood together, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Look, Abby said suddenly, pointing to the north. The Big Dipper. You can use it to find the North Star, Polaris. Grandpa taught me that it always shows the way home. Dad taught me the same thing, Michael said, smiling at Robert. We used to stargaze at this very spot. He said as long as you can find Polaris, you're never truly lost. And you never were, Robert said softly. Even when I couldn't see you, you were still shining, still finding your way. Later that night, after Abby and Old Jack had retired, to the guest rooms, Robert and Michael sat by the fire talking into the early hours. There were painful topics to navigate: the trauma of Michael's abduction, the years of separation, the challenges of reconnecting, but there was also healing in the simple act of being together again, of reclaiming their bond despite everything designed to sever it. I kept a journal for you, Michael said, retrieving a stack of notebooks from a cabinet. Started at the sugar mill. Whenever I remembered something or wanted to tell you something, I wrote it down, so that when we found each other again, you wouldn't have missed everything. Robert accepted the journals reverently. I'll read every word, he promised. There's something else, Michael added hesitantly. Something I've been working on. He opened his laptop and showed Robert a document, hundreds of pages of text under the title River Boy, a Memoir. You wrote a book? Robert asked, amazed. Michael nodded. About everything that happened, the abduction, the escape, living with Mama Josie's people, finding my way here. I always planned to publish it when I turned 18, when I could. Legally come forward without fear of being forced to return. It's extraordinary, Robert said, skimming the opening pages. Your mother would be so proud of the young man you've become. Michael smiled at the mention of his mother. I still have her photo by my bed. Talk to her sometimes when I need advice. She always gave the best advice, Robert agreed, his voice soft with remembrance. As the fire burned low, Michael finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind all evening. What about school? My education? I've been studying online, but— Whatever you want, Robert assured him. College, if you're ready, or we can arrange for tutors to help you prepare. Your future is wide open, Michael. I want to study environmental science, Michael said decisively. Living with Mama Josie's people, seeing how they coexist with the river instead of trying to control it. It changed how I see everything. Then that's what you'll do, Robert promised, and maybe you can help reshape Thornton Enterprises into something that builds up communities instead of exploiting them. 6 months later, the sun shone brightly on Riverhaven. The scars of the flood had begun to heal, with new construction rising alongside restored homes. But unlike previous recovery efforts, this rebuilding followed a comprehensive plan developed with input from community members, environmental experts, and sustainable development specialists. Robert stood on the site of what would become the Riverhaven Community Center, watching as construction crews prepared the foundation. Beside him, Michael pointed out features of the design to Abby, who listened intently, occasionally offering suggestions of her own. Old Jack approached, accompanied by Mama Josie, who had agreed to serve on the Community Advisory Board overseeing the revitalization efforts. Place is looking different, Old Jack commented. Better different. Thanks to you all, Robert replied. This wouldn't be happening without your guidance. The Riverhaven project, as it had come to be known, represented a complete reversal of Thornton Enterprises' previous approach. Instead of luxury developments that exacerbated flooding in lower-income areas, the company now specialized in sustainable, community-centered projects that protected vulnerable populations while still generating reasonable profits. Victoria, facing multiple criminal charges, had agreed to a plea deal that included significant financial restitution to Michael and several charities supporting missing children. Thomas Howard and the others involved in the conspiracy were awaiting trial, their immunity deals contingent on full cooperation with prosecutors. William Bennett had resigned from Westbrook Academy after providing comprehensive testimony. His career was over, but he had found a measure of redemption in helping to bring the truth to light. He now volunteered at a center for at-risk youth, trying in some small way to atone for his role in Michael's ordeal. As for Michael himself, he had flourished in the months since his reunion with Robert. Though still dealing with the psychological aftermath of his experiences, he approached each day with remarkable resilience and purpose. His memoir, published under a pseudonym, had become a bestseller, bringing attention to the issues of parental kidnapping and the exploitation of children in private therapeutic facilities. "Dad," Michael called, waving Robert over to where he and Abby were reviewing the building plans. "We were thinking the East Wing could be expanded to include a makerspace for kids. Somewhere they can learn practical skills, like the ones that helped me survive." "Excellent idea," Robert agreed. "Let's make it happen." As the afternoon progressed, more community members arrived for the official groundbreaking ceremony. Robert had deliberately kept it low-key, focusing on the people of Riverhaven rather than corporate dignitaries or politicians seeking photo opportunities. When it came time for Robert to speak, he kept his remarks brief and heartfelt. 7 years ago, a series of choices set in motion events that would change many lives, my son's, mine, and ultimately, this community's. Today we begin building something that represents the opposite of those selfish choices. This center will stand as a testament to resilience, to community, and to the power of compassion. He gestured to Michael, Abby, and old Jack. Without these 3 people, none of this would be possible. They taught me what really matters, not wealth or power, but connection, integrity, and courage in the face of adversity. As the ceremony concluded and people mingled, enjoying food from local vendors, Robert found himself standing at the riverbank with Michael. The Mississippi flowed past, powerful yet peaceful, on this clear spring day. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Michael asked. "If Victoria had succeeded? If I hadn't escaped?" "Sometimes," Robert admitted, "but then I remember something your mother used to say. Life flows like a river. You can't fight the current, but you can learn to navigate it." Michael smiled. "She was wise." "Yes, she was, and so are you." Robert put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I'm so grateful for this second chance with you." "Me too, Dad. Me too." From behind them, Abby's voice called out, "Michael, come quick. Grandpa's teaching everyone how to cast a fishing line, and he's getting it all wrong." Michael laughed. "I'd better go help. The Coleman-Thornton fishing rivalry continues." As Michael jogged off to join Abby and old Jack, Robert remained by the river for a moment longer. He thought of all that had been lost and found, of the journey that had led him here. The pendant around his neck caught the sunlight, its tiny compass still pointing true. Some might call it coincidence, a random flood, a chance rescue, a pendant preserved for 7 years. But Robert knew better. It was as if the river itself had conspired to bring them all together, washing away deception to reveal a deeper truth. He turned to join the others, leaving the river to flow on toward the horizon. Like the current, their story would continue, not without challenges, not without occasional turbulence, but always moving forward, always finding its way home. The Riverhaven Community Center opened a year later, becoming a vital hub for education, crisis response, and community development. Michael, now attending University for Environmental Science, returned often to lead workshops for local children. Abby, blossoming into a confident young woman, developed a particular interest in architecture, inspired by the rebuilding efforts she had witnessed. And Robert, though still leading Thornton Enterprises, had fundamentally reimagined its purpose. Sustainable development isn't just an ethical choice, he often told his board. It's the only viable future for business in a world where communities demand justice and environmental responsibility. The Bihi company's new direction had initially faced resistance from shareholders accustomed to maximizing short-term profits. But as the Riverhaven model proved both socially beneficial and financially sound, even the most skeptical came around. On a warm summer evening, 5 years after the flood that had changed everything, Robert sat on old Jack's porch with his old friend, watching as Michael and Abby engaged in an animated discussion with a group of local teens by the riverbank. "They make a good team," old Jack observed, his voice raspier with age but still strong. "They do," Robert agreed. "Different backgrounds, different experiences, but the same heart." "Kinda like us," the old man suggested with a wry smile. Robert chuckled. "Kinda like us." The sun began to set over the Mississippi, painting the water with gold and crimson. In the fading light, Robert could see the outline of the community. Center in the distance, its solar panels glinting, its doors open to all. Beyond it, new homes built to withstand future floods stood alongside restored older structures, the community stronger and more resilient than before. "You know, oldie," Jack said thoughtfully, "some folks say rivers have memory, that they remember every boat that's crossed them, every storm that's swelled them, every life they've touched." "I believe it," Robert replied. "This river brought me back my son." "And gave you a new family besides," old Jack added, gesturing, to where Abby was now teaching one of the younger children how to skip stones across the water's surface. "Yes," Robert agreed softly. "A family I never expected, but can't imagine living without." As darkness fell and fireflies began to dance above the water, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had begun with a pendant around a brave girl's neck, a symbol of connection that had survived separation, deception, and time itself. Some things he had learned were stronger than the current: love, hope, the bonds of chosen family. These were the true treasures, more valuable than any inheritance or corporation. And like the river, they would continue to flow, nourishing all they touched, finding their way forward no matter what obstacles lay in their path. In the end, it wasn't just Michael who had been found. They had all been found, brought together by the river's powerful, unpredictable flow. And in finding each other, they had discovered something profound, that even in the darkest waters, light finds a way to shine through.